Well, welcome back, everyone. Good evening to everyone listening at home on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, Getter, wherever you are listening. I'm here joined by my great colleague, Celine Gallas from the great province of Alberta. Celine, how are you doing?
Really good. There's lots to unpack today, so I hope everyone's buckled in and ready to get right into it.
I think we're all pretty tired. It's been, what, 4 weeks?
4 years, 4 weeks,
Too long.
something like that.
4 years. Yeah, right. Last time we talked about it, we were talking in terms of years. I think that's how we're all feeling. Honestly, it's a long inquiry, but always super interesting. I'm also joined to my left by Freedom Convoy key figure, Tom Marazzo. Tom, how are you doing?
Volunteer. The volunteer is very good.
Well, on your LinkedIn profile, we see that it is written internship. So are you an intern or a volunteer?
I guess I could say both because technically interns usually don't make a lot of money if they make any money at all. So let's go with intern or volunteer.
That's right. Unless you're an intern hired by the NDP or the Liberal Party at the Parliament, there you are unionized and you make a bunch of money. They make a lot of money, interns. I think that you would be very surprised to see how much money a single intern at Parliament makes when they work for the Liberals or the NDP or the Greens, because the Conservatives don't have the right to be unionized, which is pretty funny.
There's a rumor going around that I actually work directly for Doug Ford.
Wow.
And for the record,
That's
I've
incredible.
never been in a room on a Zoom call, phone call. I've never done smoke signals or chiseling away at stone tablets with Doug Ford.
That's right.
So when we clear that up, I have no knowledge of it.
Well, I think you've been speaking negatively enough about Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau for people to see that you're not the most nice to them. All right, if you guys want to chat with us tonight, go to Rumble or Odyssey. And there you will be able to send us paid chat. If you send us a chat that is higher than $5, we will be able to read it on air. A few times I was misgendered. Afterwards, it was corrected by the person who sent the chat. But anyways, if you want to chat with us, you can always head on there. Also, one last announcement before we get right to it. Listen to that. Once again, Rebel News Live, rebelnewslive.com if you want to get your ticket. We will have two events, one in Calgary on the 25th of November and one in Toronto on November 19, 2022. If you go there, you will be able to hear Tamara Lee speak. You will be able to hear Pastor Archer Pavlovsky speak, Ezra Evans speak, Shilgan Reed. Who else, Celine?
We've got our friends from True North, Andrew Lawton, as well as Derek Fildebrandt from the Western Standard, and many other rebels for you to meet and mingle with.
Exactly. So if you guys want to have a chance to mingle, that's a great word, mingle. If you guys want to have a chance to mingle with your favorite Rebel News reporters, your favorite public personas like Tom Marazzo, who's not a convoy organizer, you can head on to rebelnews.com and get your ticket for either Calgary or Toronto. That is rebelnews.com. All right. Today was the last day of the Emergencies Act inquiry for the week because tomorrow it is Remembrance Day. And well, if you go to CPAC or our website or the Public Order Emergency Commission.com website, you will not see any live stream because we have a break tomorrow. So today was the last day of the week. And can you tell us more about the two people that we got the chance to hear from today?
Yes. So there was two testimonies that we heard today. So yesterday, as you know, we didn't get to touch on Mario Tomasso's his testimony because that was during the time where the lawyer for the Commission Senior Counsel actually fainted or allegedly fainted. We're not sure exactly what happened. Sure. Safe to say. So today we got to see that. It resumed this afternoon. And this morning we had from the Alberta government, we had Marlon DeGrant. He's a part of the Law Enforcement Oversight Division for the Ministry of Justice and Solicitor Governor. So we can take a look at some clips following that. And then again, this afternoon, we had Mario Di Tommaso. He's the Deputy Solicitor General for the province of Ontario here.
Right. So how did you find today? Your general analysis of how today went?
Gosh, such a loaded question, William. Well, fresh off the top of my memory, if we can talk about Di Tommaso's his testimony was very, very lengthy. I was actually surprised that there was only two testimonies in a full day, but I'm not surprised because there was so much to unpack. A lot came to light. We had some clips that revealed, and we'll be able to show you as well. But one in particular is where he admitted that there was an attempt to contact the convoy in Ottawa in particular by the provincial government in Ontario that was then denied by the federal government. So that's very breaking to me. I mean, we've talked about through the course of the last couple of weeks that there has been no attempt to contact the organizers or the convoy in general, but that was changed today. So that is a new piece of information that I think is very important, and we'd love to show you that clip as well. Do we have that ready?
I think it was a pretty long day, and just before we get to that, and before we get to Tom, where I know that you've been live tweeting all day, where can people follow your live coverage on Twitter?
Yeah, so if you go on Twitter, you can go to Celine, CXLIV. I'll spell my name for you, not Celine like Dion. It is Italian, so SELENE. And then last part of it is CXLIV. We're going to pull it up. There it is. And you can follow me for the entire day's proceedings going forward. I live tweet from the very beginning of the morning to the very end until I come here and I prepare to do the live stream for a more in-depth breakdown.
Yeah, of course. Well, if you want to follow everything minute by minute, play by play, like yes. Brendan Miller would like to say, you can go to Sleeve's Twitter account. Tom, you've been following all day from what I understand. What is your general takeaway?
Interesting. I listened to some of the testimony earlier on in the morning, and obviously whenever they were talking about the military and that testimony came up, I perked up a little bit and started to listen a little bit more. But I don't really think that part of the conversations is overly newsworthy. But it was interesting to me to see that there was an attempt in Alberta to have the military get involved and provide them with some heavy equipment or towing capacity. But I think the witness today was talking about how frustrated he was that he knew, because in his organization, they had retired military there that were kind of giving advice in terms of what military equipment they could have to go and start towing trucks. But the Canadian Forces struggles desperately to keep a lot of its equipment serviceable. And so it doesn't mean that, just because the military would say, hey, we can't support you in what you're asking for, doesn't mean they don't have the equipment. It just might mean that it's actually not serviceable. And so that's always a challenge for the military. So I think, when they kind of paint that narrative that, the military couldn't do the job, it's kind of true, but not through any resistance on the part of the military to get involved. But more importantly, for a province to request the military, they do have to go through the federal government to get that support. Just because they're co-located with the military in that province with CFB Edmonton, they can't just go to Edmonton and say, hey, can you help us out here? They actually have to request that through proper channels and through the chain of command within the various levels of government, federal government, because the military doesn't work for the premier. It's not like in the United States where a governor has his own military in every state. Here we have one military and they all are federal and they answer to the Minister of National Defense and the Prime Minister. So, it was interesting to see the interpretation of how to employ the military in a situation like that. And then there was discussion about using them for using the reservists. And that was denied by the Canadian military as well. So just some interesting kind of perceptions on how to go about using the military for an operation like this. And I guess the last comment I could have about that is that, it's very, very important for the military to never to be seen as being in charge with in a law enforcement capacity. They don't want Canadians to ever have that perception that the military is actively working against its own citizens in any way.
Yeah.
We have a law enforcement, various levels of law enforcement agencies within our country. They do law enforcement activities. The military does war fighting and overseas. And so it's important that the military is never seen as being involved in a law enforcement activity.
Well, yeah. And I thought that it was really interesting when he almost went in to criticize the fact that they refused to get involved by going to as far as to say that, they have so-and-so equipment to remove much larger tanks, and goes to list a type of tank that I cannot recall because I did not retain that information. But even to just go out of the way to make a side comment that had nothing to do, he already disclosed that he knew that the military decided to stay out of it.
Yes.
It was really interesting to me.
And rightfully so, because, during the convoy itself, there was a lot of rumors flying around. The truckers were very, very agitated and worked up. A lot of anxiety about the military being called in. And I remember doing one of the live streams that I did where I repeatedly stated there is no mission for the Canadian Armed Forces right now.
Yeah.
So the level of anxiety amongst the truckers needs to come down. They don't have a mission. So let's just kind of put that to rest. This is a law enforcement government of Canada problem. This is not a military problem in any kind. And I spoke to a lot of people where we were working around the street, and I said, look, they're not a factor in this. The War Measures Act or the Emergency Act would have introduced a different dynamic.
Yeah.
But it was still my firm belief that even then the military would not want to participate in something like that. But I will say, which is disappointing, and maybe it'll come out in the future, but I think that there was we in the military, we would say that somebody was leaning forward, meaning kind of getting ready to do a possible task.
Yeah.
And I think there is some evidence that the Chief of Defense Staff was leaning forward and anticipating that maybe he would be employing his soldiers in Ottawa.
Goodness.
Well, that's an interesting analysis. We're just going to start we're going to start with the commission, with the clips that we have from today. We're going to start with clip number 1. We're already starting with an interesting clip. Mayor, Marlene DeGrand from the Alberta Public Safety Minister said that the protesters at the Coutts border blockade were already dismantling the blockade on the morning of February 14th, the day that Justin Trudeau decided to invoke the Emergency Act once again on Valentine's Day. Very ironic. Let's take a look at what DeGrand had to say.
Sorry, let me back up. The evidence we've heard is that protesters met in the morning of February 14th and decided they would be leaving the next morning. Were you advised on the 14th that they had made that decision?
I was.
And do you recall around what time you were advised?
It was very early in the morning that I was advised of the enforcement actions. Very early for me, sorry, 7:30. Now I'm struggling now to recall if it was at that particular conversation or in one of the conversations I had in the morning that I was advised that it looked like the protesters were now dismantling. I want to think it was kind of a little bit later on, but that would be speculative on my part. It was all within the morning, certainly, of the 14th.
So within the morning, you understood they would be leaving the next morning?
Or in beginning preparation that day, actually, and there was already events people taking down tents and structures and leaving on the 14th.
I thought that his testimony was pretty interesting. He didn't have the same dialogue as, Doug Ford or people from the OPS or the OPP or Jim Watson had. He didn't seem to be as prone to a federal military response to the convoy and to the blockades as other people were.
Well, you know why? Because he's from Alberta.
Yeah.
That's why. But yeah, no, in all seriousness, like this also correlates with other testimonies that we saw coming in from Coutts. So Mayor Jim Willett, as well as Marco Higginbotham, and no, those were the only two that testified from Coutts. Correct me if I'm wrong. In regards to Coutts specifically.
Directly from Coutts.
Yeah,
those were
so that all matches up. And it's also the same with the other border blockades that we saw, the one in Windsor specifically on Ambassador Bridge. Those blockades, so to speak, were all dismantled prior to the Emergencies Act being invoked as well. So I don't know.
Just to reiterate it, the convoy in Ottawa had nothing to do in terms of the organizational purposes to the convoy in Coutts. Well, not the convoy, the blockades in Coutts.
There was, to my knowledge, absolutely no connection to any other protest across Canada. And I testified to that fact as well. And Justice Rouleau actually asked me if I was making an assumption or if it was actually, I knew for a fact there was no connection. And so for this particular question, it's an important question that I remember speaking to people where I was located, and I said, we are not getting involved in any other convoy or any blockade of any kind. We need to be very, very specific about that. Maybe I think you can make a case that the convoy inspired other people to take action in their area. But I didn't want to get ever painted or accused, and here we are, November, I didn't want to ever be in a situation where we would be accused as being like this national headquarters coordinating all the things, which interesting is when the commissioner of the OPP was testifying, he said he was absolutely convinced that there was national coordination in order to test the limitations of law enforcement across the country and across the province. And I fundamentally disagree with that assessment. And it's unfortunate that that's a statement that he had kind of made on the stand. I was very, very frustrated by that.
Yeah, but I think it's unfortunate that he chose those words like that, but not unfortunate in the way that it does anything to deface already what we know, which is that there is no way. There's no way that there was communication through. They all happen at different times. If anything, I'd like to just point out that I believe that Coots actually inspired the rest of the blockades because they were the first ones to just decide to drop themselves down and stop moving from a slow roll. In Ottawa, there was so much going on that even despite Coots happening, I couldn't even catch up to Coots myself until we were almost all the way to Coots in Alberta from our trip back because there's so much going on. And that's a huge aspect, right?
And you know, what's interesting is I watched the Trucker Rebellion, the documentary that you guys did. And what's his name? I don't know. He's around here. He's somewhere in this building. He was heavily involved in this documentary.
Would you mean Kian Simone, Rebels Kian Simone?
And I think if I look over my shoulder, I'm looking right at him.
The man behind the camera.
But I learned so much from that documentary. And as I was watching it, I have to admit, I felt a little bit of sadness in the fact that even during these two things were happening simultaneously, I wasn't paying more attention to the other events across Canada because what they were doing in Coots was just unbelievable. Like I was very, very impressed when I watched the documentary and could see what people were going through. Yeah. And I know somebody that was at Coots that I met this summer when I was traveling out there. And so what was happening around the country, we didn't need to coordinate it. It wasn't required. It just was not important to coordinate it. Everybody was doing their own thing in the best way that they thought to get the change that we were all looking for. And we all had almost the same goal. So the fact that it was grassroots across the country is absolutely perfect. And,
to speak a little bit more on that, if you wanted to check out that documentary yourself, you can go to truckerdocumentary.com and you can watch it there. It goes in depth behind the scenes, RCMP action. So the negotiations that went down, we had Rebel news reporters embedded in that entire story. So go check it out at truckerdocumentary.com.
Of course. Well, definitely interesting to your perspective from someone who was actually at the Coots border blockade. I wasn't there myself. I was still in Ottawa, still in the gorgeous but corrupt city of Ottawa, and you were in the small town of the great province of Alberta. How was it in Coots?
It was very different than from when I was in Ottawa. So there was kind of two aspects to Coots and that area in general that's really important to note is that there was a protest stopped at Milk River, this very small city as well, or village, I guess you could call it, right before Coots, which is just bordering on Montana in the US. So that atmosphere there at Milk River was a lot like Ottawa in the sense that it was, super party themed. The atmosphere was really uplifting. It was joyful. People were very cheery and merry and smiling and, sharing their stories and just happy to be united as one. And then you travel a couple of kilometers more and you hit Coots, and it's a very small village, about 250 people. And the tensions were high because that's where the border was next to, and that's where all of the negotiations with the RCMP were going down. That was the main, if there was a control hub for if they were going to move, if they weren't going to move, everyone there was kind of in contact with each other. And again, with no specific leader, which is very interesting, but it shows you that if there's a common goal, obviously people are going to put aside any differences that they might have for a common theme, for a common movement. And that's exactly what we saw in Coots.
Well, it's very interesting that you're talking about the fact that both protests had an uplifting spirit, that both protests were super positive. It was a party-like feeling. And I think despite, the protests being totally unrelated in terms of a connection between them, apart from their purpose, both protests were uplifting. Both protests had a party-like spirit, as you were talking about. I think that's very interesting to hear. And I think that says a lot. That's my point. I think that says a lot about the movement, the freedom movement currently taking place in Canada.
It was a grassroots movement from the very beginning.